Welcome to the Shema podcast series, The Power of the Hebrew Months with Rabbi Pill. Each month of the Jewish year carries its own unique energy, a spiritual rhythm woven into creation itself. Our sages teach that the months are not just markers of time, but windows of opportunity, each with its own avodah and pathway for growth. In this monthly series, Rabbi Pill and I will guide you into the flow of sacred time. Together, we'll uncover the spiritual work, the inner energy, and the actions you can take to stay in sync with the month. Tools to lift you to new levels of awareness and growth. Think of it as your spiritual workout routine written into the Torah's calendar. Month by month, we'll train the soul, awaken new strengths, and live more fully in harmony with Hashem's design for time. Join us as we journey through the Hebrew months and discover how to channel the energy of time into lasting personal transformation. Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of the Shema podcast and another installment of the Power of the Hebrew Months with Rabbi Pill. I'm excited that we are here to do the month of Nisan. You know, this podcast series started in the month of Elul, so we didn't really get to go through a full year together. I'm really looking forward to going through this whole process from the launch pad of our growth as individuals. And I'm going to sort of set things up before we bring Rabbi Pill on. That one of the things I found interesting about this month that I asked him to reconcile for me was in my studies that the month of Nisan was a little different when I was reading. It was more, it seemed, about the collective of Klal Yisrael versus every other month was very focused on the individual avodah, what we can achieve, what we're supposed to be harnessing into, how we grow in that month. But this one was very much about the collective. And I asked him to bring that back to our personal avodah. And he said that it is all about those things. But I think right there, we see there's a lot interesting going on, a lot of great insights that we're going to learn from Rabbi Pill. Rabbi, thank you so much for being here once again.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, let's get into this. How do we reconcile these ideas that we are part of a nation, but we all have our own individual responsibility and growth and things we're supposed to be doing? So how do we reconcile that?
That's a very, very important question. I think it's also an important question, not just for this month, but that's really, I think, in many ways, the dynamic in different forms that we face kind of all the time, or conflict that we find ourselves straddling all the time, which is the space for the individual to pursue the needs of the individual and the spiritual growth of the individual on an individual basis, finding our own path within Judaism and not only finding our own path, but charting our own path, right? We each have something unique to bring out in Judaism that no one has ever done or revealed before. And that's why we're here. It's part of why we're here. And on the other hand, can't just be individuals. We're part of communities. We're part of local communities. We're part of larger Jewish communities. We're part of a collective Jewish people, and so we have to fit somewhere in that picture also. So I think, some sense, not that it's not a question or that needs to be or a tension that can be reconciled, but in some sense, that's just how the fabric of reality is. There's the individual, and there's the collective. And that's part of what Jewish life is sort of holding that tension at the same time and muddling through in a sense, right? I constantly am trying to identify uniquely for myself what it is that I'm here to do and accomplish and reveal and chart forward in Judaism and uncover within the Torah. And at the same time, that has to be done within the context of community. And that sometimes means that individual expression is going to be somewhat limited. Sometimes it means that individual expression needs to push hard against, the boundaries of the community because community is not giving enough room for that for appropriate individual expression, and something will be lost if the individual doesn't push. So I just want to frame it as it's not a problem, it's a feature, right? This is just a feature of, now that doesn't mean there's not what to talk about and try to reconcile and synthesize and find a path in holding both, but it's a feature that we have this tension. And I think it's also worth pointing out, especially from a spiritual perspective, from a Panemius HaTorah perspective, from a Kabbalistic perspective, all tension is good. And the world is created with tension. The world is created with tension between light and darkness, between revelation and apparent absence of God's presence in our lives, between spirituality and physicality. And the Kabbalists all describe how tension is the thing that gives birth to new things. That the way things are pushed forward is through tension. We move forward because we have tension, not in spite of the tension that exists. So in some sense, we don't want to collapse this tension entirely. I think that that's just an important starting point.
Okay, very good. I think in Bereshit, that's why it's all Elohim. It's all separation and striction and the land from the waters and the waters above and the waters below. Also this idea ties into essay I read a few Shabbos ago from the Baal Salam about, so one of the grand reveals during the times of Mashiach is that we're all one, mankind's all one organism, basically one entity. And that's why there will be no war, because it'd be as insane as your right hand getting jealous of your left hand and stabbing it with a knife. Like, no one's going to do that. But he talks about from the vantage point that we can learn everything about the system in which Hashem created by looking at our own body, which is nothing more than a collection of cells and collection of organs, and they're all necessary. I think that's the idea you're getting at here, is that the heart cell can't say, well, I really could care less about what's happening with the rest of the body, because it won't exist. It'll die if the rest of the body's not functioning properly. But yet it has to do its own part.
Right. And not only does it have to do its own part, but the heart cell can't say we should all be heart cells.
Right. Exactly.
Then it also won't be a body, right? So, the Baal Sulam that you're bringing up, and this is a major theme throughout his writings, and it's a theme in the writings of many Kabbalists. I'll just mention also Rabbi Shlomo Elyashiv, who wrote a series of books called the Leshem Shavo V'Achlama, whose yahrzeit, the 100th anniversary of his death, was this past Monday. He also was very, very big on this idea that the nature of Mashiach, what happens during the Messianic era, is not merely a revelation of the unity of everything. It's much deeper than that. And the Baal Sulam makes this point also. The Baal Sulam in several places talks about how, well, if the goal is the unity of everything, then why kickstart the whole system in the first place? There was unity of everything before there was disunity. So just stick with the original unity, right? Before everything, there's just God, and everything is unified within God. So why just leave it at that if that's the goal? But he points out that the goal is much deeper than that. The goal of breaking the unity of God, so to speak, and creating the experience of disunity that we have, and all the tensions between all the binaries that you can come up with, is to eventually, in the Messianic era, come to a point where we are realizing that all that disunity can exist without compromising unity, and absolute unity can exist without compromising the differentiation that exists within unity, right? So the body is a singular organism, despite the fact that we're not all heart cells. We have heart cells, and we have pancreas cells, and we have brain cells, and we have skin cells, and we have red blood cells and white blood cells, and everyone needs to, every single little individual part needs to be what it is, and it can't be what something else is. But they're all, despite the fact that they're all different, they're all one. The Messianic era is a realization the individual doesn't melt away into the collective. And the collective doesn't melt away in favor of the individual. Rather, the individuals remain individuals, and the collective of individuals remains a unity of individuals that doesn't destroy the individuality of the individuals. If we want a full synthesis of the tension between the individual work and the collective work, we have to wait till the Messianic era for a full for a full understanding of that one. I don't know. We're not there yet. We can toy with it a little bit, I think. So one valuable way of understanding this and understanding the value of Nisan, if we're going to understand the month of Nisan as sort of a movement from individual work to a sort of a more collective work, right? Because Nisan why is Nisan the beginning of our spiritual year? And again, you emphasize this already in the intro, but we should focus, although we've done 7 of these, we should sort of reorient ourselves and imagine that we're doing this for the first time right now. The Torah says that this month, the month of Nisan, is the first of all of the months, and it is the first of all of the beginnings, of all of the chadashim, of all the beginnings that will ever occur. This is the beginning. We should think of this a little bit as the year starts now, in a certain sense, right? So we've done half a year, the second half of last year, but now we're doing the beginning of this year, and that's happening right now.
The other thing too is that the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh was the first mitzvah we got as a nation.
Exactly so. And interestingly, fascinatingly, the tension is built in there in and of itself, because if this month, which is the first, right, other mitzvos were given in the Torah earlier in history to individuals. But this is the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people as a national entity for everybody to observe and everyone to uphold. And yet the mitzvah itself, and especially sort of more homiletic and less literal understandings of the mitzvah, emphasize that this mitzvah and the idea of Rosh Chodesh in general is all about newness and renewal. What is newness? What is renewal? It's dynamism. It's change. It's evolution. I'm not what I was yesterday. I'm going to be something different than I was today. So ironically, a mitzvah being given to a corporate entity, right? The Jewish people, which by definition is static, right? The only thing about the Jewish people that changes is its individuals, not its corporate identity. The collective identity is Jewish people all the time. And yet we're being given, the collective entity is being given a mitzvah that says change. And that can only apply to the individual. Individuals change. I wake up every morning and I'm different. From moment to moment, I'm different. There's renewal all the time. I'm doing something and it's a new thing that I'm doing right now. It's a new experience. It's a new page that I'm studying, a new prayer that I'm davening, because Shachris this morning is not the same as Shachris yesterday. So that in and of itself, the mitzvah, which is given to the collective, sort of is embedded within this, is sort of this very tension, which is interesting to appreciate, I think.
Absolutely.
But if we focus on this idea that Nisan is the beginning, right? So we're moving into sort of a new space right now, right? Nisan is a new space. We had last year, we went through the cycle of last year. We've talked many times about the upward spiral of Jewish time, that Jewish time is both secular and linear. It both repeats itself from year to year, the same holidays, the same dates, and on from year to year. It's also linear because every time we encounter them, it's not the same thing that we encountered last time. It's something new. So what we're left with is, if you have a circle and a line, you end up with the circle spiraling upwards, basically. And so what we're entering now is sort of a new reality, right? Something higher than where we were over the course of the last year. We went through the last year. We did all the work of the last year. That work culminated, as we discussed last month, in Adar, with the realization that all of the mundanity of this past year and all of the things we've like sort of settled into as routine over the course of an entire year, that's actually something very special, and hidden within that is God's presence, and which was the idea of Adar and Purim and the Megillah, and we talked about that last month. And so now we're into a new reality. So in a certain sense, entering into a new space, by definition, is sort of a movement from individuality to collectivity. The Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, talks about how all of reality can sort of be described in sort of a two-stage process. Sort of others take this idea and expand it into sort of a four-stage process. But really, there are always the two dynamic, there are two intention realities that always exist. One is called a reality of Tohu, and one is called a reality of Tikkun. Tohu means chaos, and Tikkun means things that are rectified, fixed, organized, appropriately set up. And the world always works in cycles of, the Arizal says, creation works in cycles of Tohu and Tikkun, of chaos followed by a fixing of that chaos. And he speaks about how the original chaotic state, and really all chaotic states, are functions of absolute and total individuality. He refers in his writings to this as olam hanekudim, the reality or the consciousness of individual dots. Nekuda in Hebrew, right? Those are the dots on the letters. And so a nikud or nikudim are dots, meaning everything has its own entity. If I have dots all over the place, or if I have a polka dotted shirt, so each dot takes up its own space, and it doesn't mix with the other dots. Everything stands on its own. That's the individual on its own. It's interesting. He also refers to this as using halachic terminology, Jewish law terminology. He refers to this as rishus harabim, public domain. We know from the laws of Shabbos that there's a difference between public domains and private domains. In public domains, we're not allowed to carry. It's the public sphere. It's a sphere of individuals. And within that sphere of individuals, that sort of keeps us on Shabbos. There are restrictions that apply to that sphere. We don't carry within that space. We don't transform that space into our own space by carrying through it. And now I own this. Now it's my space by sort of utilizing that space for private purposes. So there's this idea of Rishus HaRabim. It's a space of individuality, pure individuality. And then he says there's the alternative reality is the reality of Tikkun, Olam HaTikkun. Olam HaTikkun is also known as Olam HaBerudim. Birud or Berudim means sort of splotchy. Instead of polka dots, now you have sort of splotches of color. A splotch of color is blended. Instead of the polka dots all standing on their own, all of the polka dots break open and they blend with each other. They're all different colors and all the colors blend into each other. That's what Berudim means, splotchy or muddled. And that, he says, that is a Tikkun reality. That's a rectified reality. That's a stable reality. That's the entry point into a new, higher level relative to the place of individuality we're coming from. That is also, again, in the laws of Shabbos terms, that's Rishus HaYachid, private domain. What is a private domain? When we put up an eruv, or we build a wall, a fence around our property, or a fence around our neighborhood, and we make it a private domain, we're taking all the individuals and saying, you're part of one collective. You're all together in one space. So your individuality is sort of melting to a degree, not entirely, but is melting into sort of a collective identity as well. So moving into a new reality in Nisan, which is again, right, relative to last year, we're leveling up in the spiral, in the upward spiral. So now we're in a new reality. We're moving from a space of relative tohu, relative individuality, because compared to the togetherness we can experience in the new year, last year's togetherness might as well be pure individuality. Now we're moving into a new level of cooperation, a new level of, as the Sfarim write, a new level of unity, of love for each other, of companionship, of interdependence with each other. That's what collective identity is, right? Not everyone melts away into the collective, but all the individuals have a togetherness identity because they all appreciate their interdependence with each other and their mutual support for each other, and they want to engage that. So to the extent that Nisan is about collective identity, it's perhaps because Nisan is this new movement into a new level of spiritual work. And in that new level of spiritual work, we're moving from individuality to greater awareness of our interdependence, greater awareness to our of our collective identity, not because our individual identity is going away. The individual work is still there, but my individual work is relevant to your individual work, and your individual work is relevant to me, and I have to care about you, and you have to care about me, and everybody else as well. And so that's one way I think of thinking about what it means for Nisan to be this movement into collective as opposed to individual. It's a positive move into the next level of spirituality, because ultimately, what does that mean? It means the greater our collective identity, again, without losing the individual, but the greater our collective identity is, the closer we are to getting to that point of the Messianic era, of appreciation for the reality of what God really is, because God is the ultimate unifier of all differentiation, of all individuality, without negating that individuality. That's what we're moving toward. So to move from last year to the new year with Nisan is to move from relative less awareness of that collective identity to a relatively higher awareness of that collective identity, but that doesn't negate the individual work. I think that's very important.
Okay. Matter of fact, you brought clarity to me, because it emphasizes the individual work, because when I become better, when I learn and grow more, it elevates all Klal Yisrael, especially when I'm sharing what I'm learning on a podcast, and vice versa. So it's not a spiritual socialism where someone may be incentivized to do nothing and assume everyone else will carry their weight. It's a collective capitalistic type system where the more we each work on ourselves and share what we learn, the more the collective grows and strengthens.
Sure. I mean, I think there's something, I think it's in between that, right? I mean, you're the economist. What my sense is that the theory of the one way of understanding the common theory of capitalism would be all the individuals pursue their own interests, and as a result, by default, the market produces good for everybody. Here, I think we have to be more conscious. It's important to be conscious of the collective. I am working not for me. I'm not working for my advantage. I am working on me to lift everyone's boats.
Right, exactly.
So I think that's a slight,
I agree.
a slight distinction.
I will definitely say it definitely fit. I've noticed this too, like from a Torah perspective, like there's elements of communism that are accurate. Just replace the state with Hashem. I get the point, and you answered a big question for me on how we reconcile this. Something that wasn't reconcilable is definitely reconcilable. So thank you.
So I think one other point about this is that related but a little bit different is that we know from the writings of the Baal Shem Tov in particular that everything in the Torah, particularly the stories of the Torah, are sort of a collective recounting of the origins of the Jewish people. That is true. But he writes that they're also a descriptive account of each individual Jew's personal experience. So he writes this in many, many places, but he said we all have a Noach, for example, inside of us, and that identity, that personality, that energy exists somewhere in us. He and many, many others talk about specifically how we all have a Moshe, we all have a Moses inside of us. There's somewhere inside of us where we have that aspect of our personality that is Moshe. And the truth is, we also have a Paro inside of us. We have a Pharaoh inside of us too. That's not so. We don't like that part so much. All of these and all of the narratives of the Torah, right? The sacrifice of Isaac, Akedas Yitzchak, and the enslavement in Egypt, and the exodus from Egypt, and the experience of receiving the Torah, and the experience of the golden calf after receiving the Torah, and the forgiveness we receive after doing the golden calf. These are all things that are playing out inside of us at any given moment if we're attentive and sensitive to it. So the fact that Nisan is really is an emphasis on, there's an emphasis on this. Why is Nisan the beginning? Well, this is this time when the Jewish people start. That's true. But that starting of the Jewish people with the exodus from Egypt, with Yetzias Mitzrayim, is in and of itself also an individual experience. The Komarno Rebbe writes explicitly, and it's a beautiful piece. I don't have it in front of me right now, but he writes, just as redemption, just as Geula is collective, meaning there's a collective Messiah for everybody, there's a collective exodus from Egypt for the Jewish people as a whole, the same redemption also plays out individually. We have individual experiences of the Mashiach, of the Messianic era, and we have individual experiences of Yetziat Mitzrayim. And so that too is also the work of the individual to identify those and to work with those. And it's not just about sort of a historical collective event.
Right. Because even when you just look at the written Torah, everything's, we talked about before, everything's fractal. Because it's a framework for the storyline of Klal Yisrael over history, and it's a storyline of our lives, which speaks to the same idea. Maybe a good next point to discuss is the fact that Nisan is the beginning of our redemption, as we were discussing offline, one that did not come through merit.
So this is also, I don't remember if we've discussed this before. We might not.
No, I think we just sort of discussed offline, but it was comparing to where we sort of started the podcast series around Elul and then Tishrei, which is about merit and what we accomplished. We were, as the angel said, what's the difference between them and the Egyptians? They're both involved in idolatry.
So this is right. This is well known and I think well understood. But right, the exodus from Egypt that takes place is not deserved. Right, we haven't done anything. I'm speaking the present tense because I think it's important. Right, we'll say come the night of the Seder, Chayav Adam Liros es Atzmo Ki'ilu Hu Yatsa Mimitzrayim. Each person is obligated as part of the Seder experience to work to understand and actually literally experience for themselves as if they are going out of Egypt, as if they have gone out of Egypt. So we could speak in the present tense about these things, but the Jewish people are brought out of Egypt without deserving it. They've done nothing to earn it. On the contrary, the descriptions that the rabbis have of the state of the Jewish people at the time of the Exodus are not very positive. They have fallen as far as they can fall. I don't mean that in a judgy way, but much more in a descriptive way. They find themselves as a result of the slavery, not because they're bad people or they've done bad things, but as a result of 210 years of slavery, they find themselves so overwhelmed and so distracted and so incapable of even conceptualizing the possibility of anything better, that at a certain point, if they had remained any longer, they would have been completely and totally broken. You would never recover from that. Imagine the person who is beset by so much trauma, there's just a complete and total psychotic break. They're gone at that point. There's no healing to do anymore. And we know that Avraham receives a prophecy that his children are going to be slaves for 400 years, and the slavery in Egypt is only 210 years, and it's cut short, and the Jews leave bichafezon in haste. They're rushed out and very suddenly, and the commentaries all talk about how it has to happen right then. It can't wait another moment. If it waited another moment, they would never get out, and they have to get out because that's the plan. So they have to come out. They have to come out right now. And that means they're coming out without deserving it. They're coming out actually despite the fact that they have done nothing and don't currently deserve it at all. And they're getting out anyway. So Pesach and Nisan really speak to the birth of the Jewish people, the birth of our spiritual year, speak to a certain kind of inherent, inborn validity and kedusha, holiness and sanctity and love from God that we have. That has nothing to do with whether we've done anything to deserve it. The Torah speaks in different places about two different metrics for Jewish identity. One is an inherent one, and one is an earned one. We say this, probably come back and repeat this again, come before Shavuos, but the Torah, before the giving of the Torah describes the Jewish people as a mamleches kohanim v'goy kadosh, a nation of priests and a holy nation. And a priest, in the Jewish tradition, a priest, a kohen, is born. You're born a kohen, you die a kohen, and there's nothing you can do to change the fact that you're a kohen. You're stuck, okay? There are things that you can do that change how you can function as a kohen, but you're always a kohen. There are things that you can do that will change your children's status if you do it before they are born. But if you are born a kohen, you are always a kohen. It has nothing to, you didn't deserve to be a kohen, you're just born. And you can do all the things throughout your life to not deserve to be a kohen, and you're still a kohen. It's always interesting. It's funny sometimes. I don't wander through cemeteries so much, but you have the people who are like very into Jewish history, et cetera, and they wander through old Jewish cemeteries in Europe and places like that. And sometimes you encounter graves where oftentimes you can identify people who were Kohanim, right? Because either by the name, because there are specific names associated with Kohanim, or oftentimes in many old gravestones, they'll have the hands, right, shaped in the symbol of the priestly blessing on the gravestone, and that person was a Kohen. And there pictures shared all the time of this heretical Jew and that heretical Jew who were Kohanim, and their gravestones indicate that they were Kohanim. Born a Kohen, die a Kohen. You're always a Kohen. There's nothing you can do. It's inherent. Now we know that the priests, the Kohanim, originally were supposed to be the firstborn. The firstborn were supposed to be the original priestly class, I guess, within the Jewish nation. The firstborn Jews participate in the sin of the golden calf, so they lose this privilege, and it's given over to the tribe of Levi, who don't participate in the sin of the golden calf. But it's the same idea, this idea of being firstborn. What'd you do to deserve to be firstborn? I did nothing to deserve to be firstborn. And I'm always the firstborn. And no matter how bad of a child I am, I'm still my parents' firstborn. There's no way to change that. And God, before the Exodus, Hashem refers to the Jewish people as B'ni B'chori Yisrael, my child, my firstborn child, the Jewish people. The status of the Jewish people associated with Nisan is an inherent status. It's birth. We're born that way. We have it because we have it, and there's nothing really we can do to lose it. And that's one kind of sanctity that the Jewish people have, one kind of relationship with God that we have. It's an inherent one. There's another relationship that we have with God, which is not inherent. It's dependent on our behavior. It's kedusha. It's mamleches kohanim, right? We're a nation of priests on the one hand. We're also a goy kadosh. We're a holy nation. Holiness is a function of action. It's a function of intent. It's a function of work. I can go up in holiness. I can go down in holiness. I can be more elevated. I can be less elevated. It's a dynamic status, and it depends on me and my choices. And that's a different metric of relationship with God. And we have both at the same time. But Nisan specifically, Nisan is a time of inherent relationship with God. It's a time where you are born into this. You are the Jewish people. Just because you're the Jewish people, I'm taking you out of Egypt just because. Just because you are who you are, I'm taking you out. You don't have to be anything different. You don't have to earn it. I love you because I love you, and that's it. No, nothing more to talk about. By contrast, right, where we started our podcast 6-7 months ago, that's not about this inherent relationship, right? Rosh Hashanah, Elul, Teshuvah is not about the inherent relationship. It's about the earned relationship. I've messed up. I have to answer for the mess ups. I'm going to do good so that I earn, deserving of a good judgment come Rosh Hashanah. That's a metric of din. That's a metric of judgment. That's a metric of rules, of earned reward and earned punishment. But Nisan is not that at all. Nisan is the beginning. And the beginning, you're a brand new baby. You don't deserve anything, but guess what? Your mother's going to feed you anyway. In fact, you do lots of things to make your mother mad at you. And you keep her up at night and you scream and you yell and you know, whatever. And she still feeds you at the end of the day. And she still changes your diaper and she still takes care of you because it's inherent. There's an inherent value there. That's what Nisan is. Nisan is this inherent status.
One of the things I typically bring up during the Seder, I have many years, is the fact that we tend to begin the Seder talking about how Hashem redeemed us from Egypt, and we don't start at the beginning, which is Hashem put us in Egypt. And we earn the right to be forced into servitude under Pharaoh in Egypt because of the merit of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It's like, I'm sure when they were slaves, they were like, we could do without their merit, right? But I think the idea here, because Hashem's outside of time, he knew exactly what that experience would do to us, but he knew that that experience was necessary in order for us to become the nation that would accept the Torah and complete creation, to bridge the spiritual and the physical and all the things that we are been working on accomplishing for thousands of years. And it comes down to this idea of bittul, of self-nullification, as the bedrock of really where any new stage of growth is going to occur, where we strip away the ego, which is all this is very hard to do without Hashem sort of forcing it on us, where the ego gets stripped away and all your actions don't produce any outcome and you feel like you have no control over anything. That self-nullification of just getting to the point where you cry uncle and say, I am nothing. I am absolutely nothing. I can't do anything without you. Boom. Now you got the foundation. Now you're ready to begin the next stage of growth.
I have nothing to add to that. That was perfect. That was really, really very perfect. Exactly.
Yeah, I feel like I went through this a couple of years ago. So like it's all sort of coming into play. Like why on a personal level did I sort of go through an experience and now I'm sort of seeing why.
Exactly so. And it also speaks to a couple of other important ideas, I think, related to Nisan, right? So we've consistently throughout, we've touched at least on some of the ideas brought down in the Sefer Yetzirah about sort of how the energy of this month manifests in different ways. And one of the ways that the energy, two of the ways that the energy of this month manifests, the Sefer Yetzirah says, is through the tribe of Yehuda and through the letter Hey. Okay, so the letter Hey and the tribe of Yehuda. And so part of, the tribe of Yehuda represents a lot of different things. But one of them is it's associated with the idea, or Yehuda specifically is associated with the idea that leadership, that malchus, right? The malchus really, in Kabbalistic terms, malchus refers both to the kingship, but also to the sphera of malchus. The sphera of malchus is associated with sort of the manifest presence of God specifically within the created world, and not God that exists above and beyond the created world, but specifically able to be seen and appreciated in the created world without compromising the enormity of God. Right? This is similar to the idea we were talking about before. It's all related. The idea that the collective, the individual can be part of the collective without denying their individuality and breaking their individuality, and the collective can encompass the individuals without not being a unity. Similarly, God, the enormity of God, the infinitude of God, the all-power, all-encompassing aspect of God can be present within physical reality, within the created world, without compromising the massive infinitude of the divine. That's what the Shekhinah is. That's what the sphere of Malchus is. In a sense, that's also what we're thinking about when we refer to God as king. In a sense, that's also what we think about, or should think about, when we think of the concept of kingship within Judaism as well, right? That the Torah describes Jewish kings. And, there's interesting discussions in the commentaries about whether having a king, a human king, is an ideal or it's just a concession. There were, a handful of medieval commentators who actually thought that republicanism, democracy, was the best form of government, and the Torah would really prefer that, and having a king was just a concession to the times. But if people don't want to have a king, then there's no reason to have a king, regardless of any of that. But if you have a king, if you have a Jewish king from the tribe of Yehuda, what is a king? A king is supposed to be this figurehead that brings everybody together under one banner, under one collective political leadership identity, but not crushing the individual. This is what the prophet Shmuel warns the people when the people come to him and say, we want a king. and he says, let me tell you what the king is going to do, right? Imperfect reality that we live in, the king is going to crush you. The king is going to take your money and taxes, and the king is going to take your land, and the king is going to take your children for the army, and it's going to crush you. That's what a king does. That's not what a king is supposed to do, however. A Jewish king is supposed to live with a Torah scroll literally strapped to his arm 24/7. Exists as a unifying point without denying and without crushing and without devaluing the individual parts of this nation that he is leading. And so likewise, when we think about God in terms of the sphere of Malchus and the idea of Shekhinah, we have the enormity of God that encompasses everything and unifies everything without denying the presence of the individuation and nature and limitations, and the two can somehow coexist together. So the idea of Yehuda, the idea of kingship, which is again a reflection of the energy of Nisan, is partly about this. But there's something, speaking more to what you were saying before, there's something more profound, I think, about associating Nisan with Yehuda, and that is Yehuda. The reason why our Jewish kings come from the tribe of Yehuda is specifically because Yehuda is a failed character. A flawed character. I don't want to say not at all failed character, but a flawed character. On the contrary, because Yehuda is a flawed character, he's a much more successful and not failed character. But he's a flawed character. The Torah describes that Yehuda is a character that makes mistakes, in contrast to his other leader brother, Yosef, who doesn't make mistakes. He might struggle, but he always makes the right decision and does the right thing. He's an ish matzliach. He's successful, always successful. The Torah says Yehuda, the Torah describes in very explicit terms, is a sinner. He messes up. He messes up many, many times. And he also comes back from those sins and comes back from those mistakes and does teshuvah. And as a result of that, our kings come from Yehuda. Specifically from Yehuda, and specifically actually from the imperfect union that Yehuda had with his ex-daughter-in-law, and the improper union that he had with his ex-daughter-in-law, the children that resulted from that union. Our kings come through that line, and our kings come through King David, who comes from Yehuda, and King David himself is again a flawed character, a character who makes mistakes, a character who struggles, a character who sins, and then comes back from those sins. The idea of Yehuda and the idea of Mashiach and the idea of David HaMelech and the idea of the sphere of Malchus, of kingship, connected to the idea of the Shekhinah, this is all about the same idea of bringing bigger light from within a dark place. And that's exactly what we have in the story of what happens in Nisan, of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Pesach doesn't start at the beginning of Nisan. Rosh Hashanah starts at the beginning of Tishrei. Pesach doesn't start at the beginning of Nisan, because those first 2 weeks of Nisan, and we see it also in the special readings we read on Shabbos during the first 2 weeks of Nisan. We read Parshas Parah. We read special readings that are associated with the Korban Pesach, associated with things still taking place within the slavery. The slavery is still happening. The Nisan is not, bam, your exodus from Egypt. No, Nisan is the first 2 weeks of Nisan are slavery, our constriction, our darkness, our limitation, our challenge, our we don't deserve it. And the truth is, ingeniously, the way the calendar is set up, we get opportunities to actually relive that experience just because preparing for Passover in 2 weeks from now is rough. It's rough and it's stressful and it's expensive, and there's, tension in the house as everyone is trying to do things and tell everyone else how to do things their way, et cetera, et cetera. There's sort of an attempt by individuals to manage the collective and an attempt by the individuals within the collective to reassert their own individuality, and there's conflict. It's Mitzrayim. It's still the slavery of Mitzrayim for the beginning of Nisan, precisely because the Exodus, the light, the kingship, the revelation of the, awesome infinite presence has to come specifically from within the constriction, specifically from within the slavery, specifically from within the darkness. It has to emerge from that rather than the other way around. We get to a messianic era specifically because we end up in a place that is dark, and specifically because we make mistakes, and specifically because we end up challenging positions, and then we elevate ourselves from those challenging positions with teshuvah, like Yehuda, like King David. We elevate ourselves with teshuvah. Again, we're talking about teshuvah in Nisan, and really that's usually what we talk about in Tishrei, but it's a slightly different element here, because the teshuvah here is not about I work hard, and the teshuvah here is about I'm fine just the way I am. I'm inherently okay. I'm going to be redeemed from this exile. I'm going to be redeemed from this slavery, whether I deserve it or not, just because. And that's a starting point. That's a solid ground, because no matter how far down I've fallen, I can hit solid ground and use that to start climbing back up. And that's what Nisan is. That's what Pesach is.
It fits into the whole idea too of providing kingship to Hashem when you're at that state. David Hamelech too, and all the imperfections he had, as well as the matriarchal line as well with Lot and his daughter. And I think there's a very important message there too that we often forget, is that the falling, the tohu, is necessary in order for the tikkun. It seems like the way you start things off, we have to oscillate. Real growth comes from that oscillation, which is why King Mashiach will come from this line as well. So, Rabbi, there's a few more things I want to touch on that I think highlight these same ideas from different angles, and that is the mazel of the sheep and the faculty of redemption of the month of Nisan, which is our power of speech, which of course is a necessary instrument in fulfilling the mitzvah at the Pesach Seder.
We can take, I think, these two different aspects, right? These are two more of the ways in which the Sefer Yetzirah describes the energy of Nisan being manifested, right? It's manifested in the mazel, in the astrological sign of the tle, of the ram, the sheep, and it's also manifest through the human faculty of speech, right? So, in other words, meaning I think, again, just to zoom out a little bit, because we can get caught up in the details, right? When we talk about these ideas from the Sefer Yetzirah, what the Sefer Yetzirah is really saying is that the same energy that we've been discussing, what is Nisan all about? Well, that thing that it's all about, that is expressed through this month in sort of terms of the yearly cycle. That same thing, that same concept, that same idea is also being expressed through the ram, through the tle. That's also being expressed through speech. They're all different, in slightly different ways from different angles. They're all telling us the same thing. We experience the same thing when we encounter these things and when we think about these things. I think the ram, the sheep, is sort of, in many ways, it's easy to understand. It's easy to understand its association with Nisan in general, of course, because Pesach is very much dominated, perhaps less so today than it was during the time of the temple, of course, but still in memory very much dominated by the idea of the Korban Pesach, by the idea of the lamb, the sheep, the ram that everybody in the Jewish people was obligated to partake in each year as part of the Pesach Seder. It's a sacrifice that's offered in the temple on the afternoon of the first day of Pesach. During the original Pesach, from the Exodus of Egypt, it was kept tied to your bed. And then prior to that night, when the final plague was taking place, it was slaughtered and roasted and eaten and eaten that night in a particular way. The laws related to the Korban Pesach also all speak, I think, to this dynamic that we've been talking about between the individual and the collective, in various different ways. But it's a lot to say here. But I guess just briefly. So one of the laws of the Korban Pesach, one of the laws of this sacrificial lamb that is eaten, is everyone has to eat it. Everyone has an individual obligation to partake of this. So much so, by the way, that unlike almost every other law that exists within the Torah, where if someone for some reason is unable to do it, so you just don't do it, you're patur, you're excused. When it comes to the Korban Pesach, we know from at the very first the second Passover, actually, there were people who had just finished dealing with 2 dead bodies who needed to be buried in the desert, and they were impure because of their contact with the dead body, so they couldn't partake of that year's Korban Pesach. And they come to Moshe and they say, we weren't able to eat the Korban Pesach. What can we do? What should we do? The usual answer to that is, well, you were impure, so you weren't obligated to have it, so you're good. Don't worry. But the answer that Moshe receives from God is, you know what? We're going to make a second Pesach for these people. And there's something called Pesach Sheni that takes place a month after the first Pesach, so that all of those who couldn't partake of the first Korban Pesach for various extrinsic reasons are able to partake of the second Korban Pesach. A very unusual rule. So what does that mean? I mean, the individual obligation here to partake of the Korban Pesach is very critical, is very important, each and every individual. Nevertheless, the rule of the Korban Pesach is also that it must be eaten bechabura. It must be eaten as a group. No one is allowed to sit alone and eat their own Korban Pesach. Number one, because the whole thing has to be consumed, and one person, it's a lot to eat. But more fundamentally, it has to be eaten in bechabura. It has to be eaten in a group. Because that's what this is all about. This is about the individual's presence within a group. And everyone is running around before Pesach. Can I join your group? Can I join the other person's group? I imagine eventually we'll have Google spreadsheets being shared all over the place to figure out who's going to be part of which group and how everyone is. We'll have there's a good Venmo mechanism for like splitting bills or whatever, and everyone will share the bill for the sheep, and you'll sign up for who's going to participate. But it has to be in a group. It has to be done in a group because there's this dynamic of the individual and the collective taking place. The sheep, I think, also represents something else important, which is that number one, the sheep is, you were mentioning this earlier, the sheep is an epitome of the idea of bittul. The sheep is an epitome of the idea of sort of self-effacement. It's a very docile animal, perhaps the most docile of animals. On the other hand, it's also a hard-to-manage animal. You have to have a shepherd, and the shepherd has to manage a flock. And the sheep are flock animals as well. They're not individual animals, they're flock animals. And so you have this dynamic of individuality and collective as well. And you also have this dynamic, which is central to the Pesach story, as we know. Moshe is a shepherd, and Moshe's shepherding sheep is specifically what identifies him as appropriate for leadership. It's also true, by the way, and we talked, David HaMelech, King David, was also a shepherd, and his shepherding is specifically what identifies him as an appropriate leader for the Jewish people, particularly as this flawed leader who is going to transcend that. The flawed leader is going to be a shepherd. Shepherds are very patient people. They have to be patient with their sheep, and they have to be careful with their sheep. Patient people can sort of deal with the ups and downs. Patient people can sort of ride the low and wait for the high. Impatient people, they don't make it that long. And so there's so many different ideas wrapped up in this, in sheep in general, in the idea of the sheep in general, in the mazel of sheep, in the Korban Pesach, that is sort of a representation of the sheep, that all tie together. But the important point being, I think, is to appreciate that the energy of Nisan, which we're experiencing now in this month, it's coming through that manifesting within, coming through that thing.
When you have nothing but success in your life, you're prone to arrogance, and arrogant people don't make good leaders because they're impatient. So this whole idea of Yehuda and the failure, people who go through these collapses and then rebuild, have the patience. They've been there. It's another idea too, I was thinking as you were bringing these all together, is that we talk about personal growth, and we talk about Devekus and forge ourselves, be an image of God and cleaving to Hashem. That's all the same thing. Unlike the secular world where personal growth means, having six-pack abs and $100 million in the bank, right? We define it a little differently. But it's about knowing Hashem more, and the idea that I read elsewhere too is that the sheep was the idol of the Egyptians, and the idea of going from Bina, understanding, to Das is elevating the body, is getting the body to understand and know things at an experiential, deep level. That was not just leaving it trapped in intellectual ideas in the mind, which was taking that idol and making it so visceral, to making it whether the body's actually consuming that. And that's the whole idea of the Pesach Seder, is you're making it experiential. You're taking Bina type knowledge and you're turning into experiential knowledge to Das.
Right, which is right, because Das is the connection point between the mind and the body.
Right, and that's where real growth comes from, is making that connection.
So if we were going to put Das somewhere in the physical body, we would, many sources put it sort of in the amygdala, in the brainstem. Really, it's that point of connection between what goes on in my brain, the thoughts that I have, the will that I have, the desire that I have, the ideas that I have, and how those get translated into the body. And keeping those two things connected become very important, right? If I separate, it's not good to separate the two and live purely in my mind. It's also not good to separate the two and live purely in my body. But I have to live integrated with both of them, which, by the way, is the same idea we were talking about earlier, which is, again, this high sort of spiritual, ephemeral, supra physical aspect of God, and present together with the physical manifestation or the physical experience of the created world. That's the same thing happening again. And the way that happens, just to bring this back to what we were saying before, the way that happens is through speech. Speech is associated with das. Number one, because it takes das in order to speak, right? Human beings the Torah specifically identifies the uniqueness of human beings in their faculty of speech. And our ability to have das, to really connect. And we're not just creatures that are instinctual, purely instinctual creatures, but we're creatures that are actually thinking, cognizing creatures that are able to express that cognition externally. And speech does this same function that we've been talking about now. It creates collective. It moves from the individual. I can sit by myself and think. I can sit by myself and act. But speech is a collective process. I only speak for others. I don't speak for me. Whether I'm speaking to God, that's still an other. In the privacy of my own room, I'm speaking to God. That's still engaging with another. I'm drawing a connection line through hisbodedus, through the secluded conversation with God. But more fundamentally, speech communication is a collective enterprise. Language is a collective enterprise. There is no speech without community. And the difference between reading a book and having a book club about the book. The book club creates community because we're talking about the book together. We can all read it on our own, but we're not a community of people who relate to this book unless we're speaking this book. And so on Pesach specifically, and Nisan, the energy of Nisan in particular, is an energy of speech. We speak the words of the Haggadah. We tell the story. And we don't just hand everybody a Haggadah and ask them to read to themselves so that they get the story. No, we discuss it together. We're supposed to discuss it together. We tell it to each other. We talked earlier about a little bit about connections between Tishrei, which was one beginning of the year, and Nisan, which is a sort of another kind of beginning of the year. But we know from the Talmud that there are two opinions about when the world was created. The world was created either in Tishrei or in Nisan. And many commentaries sort of rectify the conflict because it's very hard to understand. The creation of the world is a fact. So when did the fact take place? How are you arguing over, was the light red or was the light green? Well, it was one or the other. So which one was it? And there's no point in arguing over it exactly. It's not an interpretive point that we can argue over. It's not an analysis. It's not an inference that could be drawn. I can draw it this way. You can draw it that way because we reason slightly differently. No, it's a fact. It's a cold hard fact. When was the world created? So many of the commentaries speak about how the world is created conceptually in thought in Tishrei, but it's created in speech. Vayomer Elokim, God spoke, and there should be light, and there was light, and God spoke, there should be fish, and there should be plants, and there moon and stars, and God spoke the world into being. That happens in Nisan. The new beginning that happens now is an active beginning. It's not a solitary beginning. It's a collective beginning. The work of Tishrei is private. The work of Tishrei is in my head and in my heart. It expresses itself in action as well, but it's not communal work necessarily. Yeah, we get together in shul and pray together because we need a minyan to do certain things, but it's a fundamentally individual work. The work of Nisan is fundamentally collective work. It's the inherent work of I belong simply because I belong. Why do I belong? Not because I've done anything good, but because I'm part of the Jewish people, and that's a collective effort. So we emphasize and we create that collective identity. And so speech again becomes an important medium through which Nisan is manifest and expressed.
Perfect. Beautiful. Thank you so much. One of the things I'll just sort of wrap up on this, but I've been working on because it's on a personal level, and I'm finding all this Torah around this idea to be providing a framework around that. Try to address the question for myself of why is it that I know so many things to be true, but my behavior is inconsistent with it? And this is the human situation we're dealing with, but yet, like everything we've been discussing today is and everything I've been sort of learning from the story of the redemption and the miracles and the Korban Pesach and everything is basically providing us that framework for doing so. Das is going from Bina to Das. It's all we're talking about. And Hashem's showing us how to do that. And why did he put that challenge in front of us? To get back to the beginning, why did he create differentiation in order to then bring it back to unity? Is giving us that opportunity to develop ourselves, to take ownership in it. Thank you so much, Rabbi. I'm looking forward to going through the next full year with you on this series.
Yes, looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed the episode and found it meaningful, please take a moment to rate, review, and share the podcast.